All right, in this lesson, we're going to build the items list. We're going to create a data collection to fill that items list. And we're also going to create an item detail page. So this will set up the basis for creating relationships against the items data that we're going to create. We're going to build this from scratch, but you'll also have a template you can start from if you prefer to just reverse engineer. Either way, let's get going. All right, so I'm going to start by just dropping a blank page onto the canvas. I'm going to call this home and start off with a heading here. Drop the heading on. We'll call this my list of items. And then we'll drop another page, which will be used for the item row. So we're going to have a list of items, and each item will be represented by a row here. Let's drop a text element on here. So we'll drop a text paragraph element, and I'll rename the default text there, just say item name. So we've got these two pages here, and let's drop a grid to connect the two together. So a grid list allows you to display a list of something using another page as the way to display those somethings. So in my case, I want to use the item row as the display. And you can see here that we have 3 of them displayed by default. So if this changes, so if I put something in here, you'll see it gets updated there as well. So it's just a representation of that information. Now that these are set up, we need to create our data collection of items. Let's go to the data collections on the left side here. We're going to make a new collection. We'll call it items. And let's add a couple of fields. Actually, let's just do item name. All right, so now we've got our item name in there. And now we need to do some data binding. So there's 2 places we want to do data binding. One is on this grid. We want to tell it to pull in the collection list. And then the other is on this item name. We want to tell it to get its information from that new item name field we created in the items collection. So let's start on the grid and then go to the data tab. We're going to choose the collection list tab here and choose the items collection and choose all fields because we're going to pull all the fields from the collection. Let's go ahead and sort this by the item name ascending, so that way it looks nice whenever we're adding the items to the list. And then on the item row, we're going to go to the data tab for the item name element that we dropped on there. But instead of collection list, we're going to pull it from a specific record value. So the context there, for the grid list, is going to be a list of all the records. Each row will be representing one record, which means we need to get a specific record value. And so we're going to pull that from a field, from the items collection, from the item name. Now, next we need a way to create items. There's a couple of ways we could do this. We could go into data collections, go to items, add a couple of records, click that twice, and I'll do item number 1 and item number 2. And then those items are created. So when I click preview, we're going to see item 1 and item 2. So we can just create the data inside of the data collection manually. We can also, though, add a way for the user to create new items directly from here. So let's do that. I'm going to drop a div on here, just a container to hold some things. And then we'll put input. I'm going to do a text input because we need a place to fill out a new item name. We'll add a button. Drop it inside that same div. And we're going to relabel this button to item. So now let's also relabel that placeholder for that to be enter an item name. So next we need to make it to where when the user clicks this button, it will create a new record. So we're going to do a new flow under the click event on the button. I'm going to call this flow new item. And then we're going to add a new action to our flow. And I'll just do record create, which will find this here. Add that in. All right, so now let's select our items collection. And we're just going to map our one field. The item name field needs to come from an element called inner item name, that one that we had created there. So now, if I go back over to the tab that's previewing it, if I type in item 3, and hit new item. Now that created the item, but notice it didn't automatically refresh the list because we didn't tell it to. So if I refresh the page, you'll see it will load. So there's our new item 3. So if I do the same thing, item 4, new item, refresh the page, you get item 3 and 4, right? So now we can make it to where this automatically refreshes. Before I do that, I want to explain how this data gets on there in the first place. So remember on this grid list, we set this data tab up to get its data from the items. The way that your application knows to use that information is actually inside of the flows. So on page load, this flow called page load is going to execute automatically. So anything you put in here is going to happen every time the page refreshes. And notice that nested inside of the page load is another flow called page binding. So what that means is that whatever data tabs have been set up for elements on that page will get executed. So all we need to do is make this execute after the user has clicked new item. So what we'll do is go into the new item flow, and I'm going to nest in the page binding. We want to make sure that we do the wait between. So I'm going to click here and that will change it to wait. So now it's going to create the record and then it'll wait until it's done. And then it will re-execute the page binding. So let's go back over here. We're going to go item 5 and new item. Now we don't have to refresh the page and the item appears. Cool. So we've got our item list. We've got our data collection set up. I'm going to do a little bit of change here in styling just to make this centered so it looks a little bit nicer. And then we'll go on to the last part of this lesson, which is the item detail. All right, to make this centered, I'm going to drop another container on here. I'm going to put it at the, well, let's drop it like this. Doesn't really matter where it goes because we're going to put everything else inside of it. So I'm going to drop this in here. I'm going to drop this in here. I'm going to drop the grid list in here. So now everything's inside this one container. So what we're going to use is some styling. I'm going to make a new primary style class, and I'll just call this home outer. And that makes a new style class. And I like to use the used props here, but you can use all props, or you can just type CSS if you prefer that. I'm going to use used props. It's my favorite way to do things. And that's mainly because I already know exactly what I'm wanting to do here. So first thing I want to do is set display block. Second thing I want to do is put margin left, right, auto. And this, when you do display block and margin left, right, auto, it's going to automatically center that div or container inside of its parent, which in this case is the page itself. But we do need to set a max width on it. So that way it gets centered, but only up to that width that we want. So let's go with, say, 1000 pixels. So if I go back over to my home page, we can see now it's centered in here. So if I refresh, we'll reload that data. And now we've got it centered with the data there. Looks a little bit cleaner here. Cool. All right, so now let's build an edit page. First thing I'm going to do is drop a new page. We'll put it here and we'll just call it item edit. And on the item edit page, we need to put, let's say, a heading where we can display the item name. So we're going to do the same thing here where we did the data binding, exactly the same as we set it up before. And item name. And then let's add a container. And inside that container, we're going to add a text box. And this is going to be the label for the item name. And then let's put an input on here so that we can modify that item name. Put an input here and the item as well. And then let's go ahead and bind that data as well. So same thing here, item name. Okay, so now we've got this simple item page that has a heading, it has a field that's going to pull in the value of the item name. And let's go ahead and set some styling on this as well. I'm actually going to do margin bottoms 0 pixels, just so that way it kind of collapses in on that. Okay, so now what I want to do is make it to where when the user clicks on the item name here, it opens this up. So we need a couple of things. We need a place to open this into, and then we need to make an action that opens that up. So let's start with making a lightbox on the home page. And I'm going to use this one lightbox right panel. And you can really place this anywhere because by default, it's going to be hidden. I think I'll bring it outside of that div. So it's on its own. So now we need a couple of flows that will hide and show the lightbox. So let's create a new flow, call it lightbox hide. And then let's make another new flow called lightbox show. All right, so now we have these two flows. So how do we hide and show this lightbox? Well, first of all, let's go look at the styling that's on it. So each lightbox, the way that it works is it has this utility class that's hidden. If I uncheck that, you can see it appears, right? So this style class is actually hiding that lightbox. And there's one on the outer, which is this one background outer hidden. There's also a hidden on the inner. So in order to show the lightbox, we need to remove those hidden classes. So we're going to have an action here called remove style class. And the class we're going to remove is that background outer hidden. And we're going to remove it from lightbox right panel, which is the outer one. I'm also going to rename this. I like to rename these. So remove class, say outer. And then rather than recreating it from scratch, I'm going to duplicate this and we'll say inner on the second one. We'll change the style class to the inner one and say to remove it from the inner element. All right. So now that's the show. The hide is the inverse. We need to add those classes. So we're going to add class and same steps, outer hidden from the outer. And I'll go ahead and change this as well. Clean it up a little bit, duplicate, inner, inner, inner. Okay. So now we need to make it so that when we click on this, we open this item edit page into that lightbox and show it. I'm also going to add a cursor style to this for the pointer. So that way when the user put their mouse over it, it's a pointer instead of text. And let's go events on this. So we're going to make it on click of that. We'll do a new flow. I'll just call it open edit page. Okay. Now we're going to use two actions in here. One is called open page into container. And we're going to open the item edit page. The container we're going to open it into is not on the current page. It's on the home page. And the container is that lightbox inner. We also have to set the record context. So remember, we're going to be inside of a row that was set with data from that record. So each row here is a record. And the record context I want to pass to the page I'm opening is the current record. So that way we're telling Builder, when they click on this, open this page into a new container and bring all the record information from the row into the edit page. That's all the setup we need to do here. Now let's add one more action that does the show from the home page. So there's a really cool action here called run flow on page, and this executes a flow on another page. So for this action, we're going to select the home page and we're going to do the lightbox show flow. So we're telling it, when I click on this, open the page into the container on the home page and also show the container on the home page. Right. Now let's go back over here. I'm going to refresh so we get the data binding set up again. And now if I click on one of these, you can see it opens that item. Now, one thing we didn't do is set a way to close this. So I have no way of closing this box out. So let's put a close button on the item edit screen. All right. So we're going to add a button to here. Actually, I think I'll take it out of the div. We'll put it below it instead. So it's on its own. And we'll say close. We're going to go to events on the button, on the click event, new flow. And we're just going to say lightbox hide. We're going to do the same thing that we did to run the flow on the other page to open it, but we're going to choose the other flow that closes it. So lightbox hide here. Okay, so now if I go back over to here, I have the close button. I can click close and it hides. Now I can click on each row. It'll open it up. The last thing we need to do here is make it so that we can edit this value. We can already edit it, but it's not actually going to save anything because we didn't tell it to. So let's go back into the studio one more time. We're going to click on this item name element. And remember, we had done the data. We set up the data so Builder knows that it's bound to that particular field in that particular collection. So what we can do is on the events, we can tell it to save automatically when the value is changed. So let's go here and just choose save and then go back over. We close this and reopen it. So let's go item 9. We'll close it. Now notice it didn't update here and it didn't update there in real time until I reopened it, right? So I want to do one more step here. I want to make it automatically update this value and automatically update the value back here. So let's do that real quick. So first, rather than autosave, I'm going to make a new flow and I'll call it change item name. And we're going to do a couple things now. One is we still need to do the autosave. That still needs to happen. But the other thing we need to do is rebind the data. So I can do the page binding just like we did to refresh the data on the home page. I can just rerun the page binding here. So if I choose wait here, it's going to save it and then it will run the page binding, which should rebuild that information. So if I do that, you'll see it recreates it there. Right? So that page binding does all that work for us. Okay, so now we need to make it also go over here and update this. So if I change this to 1-1, it's updating here, but it didn't update here. If I refresh, we're going to see all of our updates here, but let's make that happen automatically. So we're going to use another run flow action. And the flow we're going to run is on the item row. We're going to rerun the page binding. So now when the user modifies that, it saves it. Then it runs the page binding locally, which is going to update anywhere else that value is used. And then it's going to run the page binding on the row to do the same thing so that that work happens without having to wait. So let's open this again, and then we'll change this and should actually be able to see it back there, get changed. You can actually see it's grayed out back there, but if I close this, you can see it's already updated back there in real time. So change this back to number 2, close. You can see it's all happening in real time now. So now we've got our basic setup. We have one data collection with a list of items. We can create those items. We can modify those items, and we're ready to go to creating data relationships. So in the next lesson, what we're going to do is add comments to this edit screen. So when we come in here, we'll be able to add comments. And if you think about how comments are structured, you have one item with a bunch of comments. So that's what's called a one-to-many relationship. So that's the next thing we're going to create. All right, that's it for this lesson. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.